with my
The
very
church bells are going. Can you hear the church bells?
Your video is also going, Christine.
Oh.
Coming up on this episode of Raise.
This isn't just about the money. Of course it's about money, but it's also about the return, but it's about everything else that sits alongside that. And then we're not always very good at going back and saying, hey, you know that investment we had? We're now seeing the lead indicators come in. You get the money back in, you pay the organisation back your budget, and then you invest the surplus in your next event. Trust me, myself, the chief exec, the chair of the board, I'm not in 10 years' time going to be scrutinising this number and saying you were £20 out. There's more money raised from closing gaps in retention and tidying up journeys.
Hello and welcome to Raise, the podcast for fundraisers by fundraisers. This is the podcast where the concept is sitting around the pub or a coffee shop, having conversations with people who know a lot more than us. You get to have those crunchy conversations, talk about those topics that people expect you to know, but nobody actually ever tells you across your career. I'm joined for this virtual recording with Sian.
Hi, and we are joined by the amazing Luke Mallett today. Hi, Luke.
Hi there.
So, Luke, you've been in fundraising for 25 years, leading income growth, working across the charity sector. You started your career in public health, and then you went on to have senior roles at charities including British Heart Foundation, Young Lives versus Cancer, Diverse. You, in 2023, founded your own consultancy company, which is what you're doing now, supporting charities with growth, transformation, and turning around the challenges they have. You're currently interim director of fundraising at Ben, and you chair the Elisha Foundation, and you're a trustee at Terence Higgins Trust, where you chair the development committee, and you live in Paris with your partner and your dog, as well as working across London. So just a busy life, right? Really, I was going to make a joke about it, but it's just like a really busy, impressive life.
Certainly busy. I don't know about impressive, but certainly spend a lot of time travelling, that's for sure.
Amazing. Before we dive in, I'm just going to cheers, because we always forget to do this. So, and we're at home, so we've all got different drinks, but cheers. Here's to raising money, voices and glasses. What's everyone drinking?
I'm on the red wine this evening. I found half a bottle still hovering in the kitchen, so I can't attest to its quality. But
I'm drinking a Gavi, which I did also find hovering in my kitchen in the fridge. So
where are these magical kitchens that you both?
But I also just brought it up with me, so I was be able to replenish as necessary potentially.
Amazing. And I have a margarita. Because after 2 years of being on this podcast, not a single guest has ever asked for a margarita, which is my go-to drink. So I just thought I'd make my own one and bring it on. And a little salt rim, bit of like lime in there. It's great.
Amazing. So Luke, we have been wanting to have you on this podcast for such a long time, since before the podcast ever even came into existence. You've been on the top of our list when we first started planning who are the people we wanted to talk to really pick the brains of. So this has been a long time coming. I know I've hounded you a lot over the last couple of years, including at the IFC and everywhere kind of in between. So I'm so glad that we've been able to kind of pull it together. I'm sorry that it is in the middle of a heat wave and you are in a sweltering room, but it's worth it for us.
So it's worth it. It's worth it to be sweltering to be on. So thank you so much for the invite. And I'm not quite sure what to say, as I've been sort of hunted down for this, but I'm really delighted to be here both.
And we are both fundraisers. Like, you know, we just hunt people down.
We're like, that's what we're gonna do.
Yeah. And I was going to say, before we dive in, Luke, you were actually on our Christmas calendar as well, which was the things I learned the hard way so you don't have to, which was great.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what I did for it now, but I'm one thing I do know is it was the 15th of December because it was my birthday.
It was.
Yay!
It was your birthday.
So yes, I'm surprised after that you wanted me on the podcast, to be honest.
You were great.
That was like our little audition for everybody. They don't know it yet, but most people, that was their audition. So today we are going to be talking about investment and fundraising, which is a super important topic and definitely one of those things, especially as you kind of move up in your career, you need to start being able to pitch for investment in your team. If you are at like a manager or head of level, often across a directorate, it can be for a single project. It can be for a complete strategic redevelopment. There are a lot of different elements and ways that you might need investment in fundraising. And I do think it is one of those things that you kind of just like learn as you do it. Nobody actually is like, here's some things you need to think about and how you might do that. Like one day they're like, yeah, just write a business case. And you're like, okay.
And I was just going to say as well, it feels really timely. I think kind of in the economy and in the situation we find ourselves in at the moment, where I think the natural instinct of a lot of charities is to reduce staff levels, is to reduce fundraisers. Like if the money doesn't feel like it's coming in, like this feels like a really timely topic and conversation to be like, oh, if you're struggling with income, cutting your fundraising team actually is probably not the best idea. Some investment might be helpful.
I think that's really true, and we're kind of in a world that's changing so fast, and I think that sometimes leads to a bit of paralysis because actually you kind of get the boards and fundraising directors sort of saying, well, this is just changing so fast. How do we know that this is going to work? And from my perspective, sometimes that's the best time to be making an investment. There's lots of opportunity out there, but I think it does come down to the case people make and how strongly and effectively they make that. So yeah, I'm with you. I think it's such an important topic.
And then when people hear investment and fundraising, when we think investment, most of the time you're drawn straight to that must be a financial investment. But investment can actually look like a lot of different things and can be across a lot of different elements. So can we talk a little bit about what investment actually means and why some of those investments beyond just money make some of the biggest differences and what that could look like?
We're all fundraisers, yeah. So we're in theory asking people for money all the time. But when it comes to asking for money for a project or a bit of fundraising or some acquisition work or whatever, all of a sudden we perhaps kind of get this different head on us, and we're the number of times I've kind of seen people like almost like in a bit of a kind of paralysis about, oh my goodness, how do I go about asking for this? Like I want £1 million to invest in an acquisition program. And I think people get very focused onto the money and the return, which is of course important, but actually all of the other stuff that goes with investment that actually probably makes that much easier to do and makes the case much easier. So actually we want people to believe in fundraising, don't we? We want our donors to believe in what we're doing. We want those people that are investing in fundraising to believe in it. We want perhaps engagement. We want involvement. We want commitment. We want other teams to align with what we're trying to do. For me, all of those things are sort of part of an investment, because actually the money alone to spend on fundraising is only going to ever get fundraising, I think, to good. Like the rest of the organization being aligned with that and the right culture and the right way of making decisions is the thing that's going to make that investment really carry. So I think actually us saying to our boards or our exec teams or wherever you're going for that investment, this isn't just about the money. Of course it's about money, but it's also about the return, but it's about everything else that sits alongside that. And I think if you can bring people with you in belief of what you're trying to do and what you're trying to achieve, the whole question of actually that financial investment becomes a lot easier.
I was going to say, I think it's really interesting because I feel like if I was to distill that very eloquent explanation down, it's almost like we lose our skills as a fundraiser when we start asking for investment. Like we would never ask a donor for an investment based on ROI. Like we would never ask them to donate like simply based on ROI. Like it is exactly as you said. It's like all the change it can make, everything that can happen. It almost feels like we don't apply our skills that we use in our lives when we're asking donors for money to our own business cases.
I think it's fascinating, isn't it? I think I agree with you. And you look at kind of corporate pitches, because I suppose that's in a way sort of similar, isn't it? You're going to a corporate, you're asking them to buy into your cause. You're telling them all of the different things it's going to do for their business, why it would be such a great thing. And at the end of it, you're saying, and by the way, we'd like you to support us. Whereas sometimes we kind of find ourselves in front of boards with business cases for fundraising, and all of a sudden we've sort of moved into a different world. And I think the language around this is really interesting, and we'll probably talk some more about kind of other types of investment outside of investment in fundraising, because I think there's a bit of a different mindset plays out in boards as well around this. But yeah, I think we shouldn't lose sight of the thing that makes kind of fundraising great, whether that's about the stories, whether that's about the passion, whether that's about the belief, because actually it's those things that carry a case for support or an ask, and then the money follows. But all too often, I kind of see business cases that someone's put forward, and I'm sure like the maths behind it and the analysis behind it is first rate. But it kind of just feels like it hasn't got much passion. It's here's the ask for £1 million of face-to-face fundraising, and you're kind of like, but tell me more about what that's going to do for the cause. Like, head off my view that actually face-to-face fundraising is all about chuggers on the street. I'm a trustee treasurer who's been here 30 years. I don't think we should be buying into this. And you're telling me all of these numbers, but what about the complaints it's going to generate? And actually the opportunity to kind of head some of that off and tell the story of those brand ambassadors who are out there for the charity, and the conversations they have, not just the conversations that lead to a regular gift, but the conversations that don't, what those also do for your brand and the awareness of your charity and the passion that these people have for the cause. And all of a sudden it becomes a very different proposition, yeah?
I do think too, less so now, but so fundraising, I think for a long time has kind of been like this, like almost step cousin in an organization. Like an organization is there to deliver the services that they exist for. And fundraising has kind of been seen as like this, like means to an end that we have to do. Recently, and I guess when I say recently, I kind of mean in the last like almost 10 years, like 8 years, there has been a shift that fundraising is more integral to the DNA of an organization, and that idea of a true fundraising or philanthropic culture is permeating, but it's taking a long time to really take hold. And you feel like a lot of times there's the balance of an organization of how they're kind of seeing like, well, if I invest in fundraising, I'm not investing in services. Does that mean I'm not reaching as many people? And it can be really like challenging to strike that balance, especially if they've had what they've deemed as fundraising investment not pay off in their minds.
And before I come to your sort of main point, and sometimes there's a little bit of a mythology that surrounds the previous fundraising investments. It's a bit like sort of what did the Romans ever do for us? And I've kind of seen situations where kind of exec teams or whatever said, yeah, but we've invested in fundraising before and it's never quite delivered what we thought it was going to deliver, or it's always oversold, underdelivered, that kind of thing. And actually, quite often when you go and look at it, actually the truth is very different to that. And I think that's on us as fundraisers as well, because I sometimes think we have this huge build up to getting the investment. We finally succeed with it. We get that investment into whatever it is. And then we're not always very good at going back and saying, hey, you know, that investment we had, we're now seeing the lead indicators come in on legacy pledges, and we're seeing this uplift. Because actually we're talking about things that may not come to materialize for several years, maybe even 10, 15 years, when actually with kind of turnover in organizations, probably no one who was part of that decision will still be working there. But I also think your point about, I think you charitably said sort of fundraising as the distant cousin. I think sometimes it's described as the poor relative. And for anyone that hasn't read Alan Clayton's book, Great Fundraising Organisations, it's definitely a read on this front, because Alan's work and that of Adrian Sargent really identifies that those organisations, as we were saying from earlier, whose fundraising gets beyond good and gets to great, are organisations where the whole organisation is empowered and enabled behind fundraising. And those organisations recognise that they've got effectively two missions under one purpose. So that the fundraising isn't something that's just a kind of side or a necessary evil, as sometimes I've heard it described. It's actually the thing. And if you take the mission of the organisation, whether that's, I don't know, to help communities in rural Africa, or whether that's about helping people living with HIV, effectively the purpose of the organisation is to raise the money in order to do those things. And so actually the fundraising effectively is the enabler to everything else. And there are other enablers as well. And I think we shouldn't be afraid to be saying that and building cultures around that, because that makes actually that investment work a lot harder. It aligns the whole organisation behind it. And sometimes that is the choice of saying, look, we can do this one of two ways. So we've got finite amount of money, and we know that this project needs capital expenditure of whatever to do this great thing for that community. If that thing could wait for 2 years, and instead you routed that money through fundraising, in 2 years' time, you could have the money that you've invested back, and you can do the thing for the roof. But we would still have then that fundraising program running, and that money again available to reinvest elsewhere. And I think we shouldn't be afraid of kind of challenging some of that. Well, we've got to spend it all on the mission, because actually spending the money on the fundraising means you can achieve more for your mission over certainly the medium term, if not the longer term. And I think actually you can win colleagues even in service delivery and program delivery and in international development round to that. Look, if you could make that vehicle last another couple of years, and we could invest that money now in fundraising, we can buy you a new vehicle in 2 years' time, but we'll also then have those additional donors who will be giving to us in the longer term. And I think actually when you start to articulate fundraising in that way, which is more like an investment, actually people start to understand and go, oh, okay, so actually there is a way that this can work for us from a commercial and a business sense, and we can still do what we want for the mission. It may just take a little bit longer, but in the long term, it will mean we are able to do more.
Yeah. Oh, it's so interesting. Like, I think as well, like the first thing that's come to my mind as you've been talking is like how, when you're talking about the change that fundraising needs to have, so like that kind of like, if you can hold this now, invest in fundraising, and in 2 years we can do it. It's like the investment actually is like such a small slice of the pie of what we're actually asking. And actually the fundraising investments that I've seen that haven't worked, and probably what those exec boards are talking about, is where the money has been given to fundraising, but nothing else has shifted or changed to enable that investment to grow, or to enable that investment to work. So either like the culture hasn't shifted, or it's been like, oh, well, you've got the money, so now you just need to do it. Like, but we're not willing to do the impact stories. We're not willing to invest in the tech. We're not, like, whatever it is. But it's almost like sometimes organizations get in their own way because they're like, well, we've given you the cash, so what else do you want?
But it's also the time, right? Like the lead time. So like a lot, and that goes to the culture thing. So they can give, like, Luke, your point about like if you can wait for the car or the roof or whatever it is, but a lot of times they'll be like, oh, we need to replace the roof in 6 months. Can you raise the money so we can? And it's like, well, no, I could, but that's not good fundraising. That wouldn't be a good practice of fundraising. A better practice of fundraising would be like to have conversations, to bring the major donors on board, to like plan, to have it be like a system of fundraising and not just like an emergency appeal because the roof is going to fall down.
Do you know what? Like, I think some of that's on us again. I mean, hard on myself today. Hard on us fundraising.
Yeah, but that's okay. We can be hard on ourselves.
No, but do you know what? Like, I think we can all probably think of times where we've been in like a boardroom or whatever, and we've kind of slightly bitten our tongue as someone said, perhaps something even, and this has happened to me. Someone said, well, someone just needs to get hold of Bill Gates. Does anyone know Bill Gates in the room?
Have you just tried asking Kylie Minogue?
Have you thought of calling Richard Branson? He's really generous.
Well, I do have a relative who used to work for Melinda Gates as her chief of staff, but I don't, which was actually my reply. But I said, but I don't think that's really what's called for right now here. But then when I thought about it, I was like, but really, we haven't taken people on this journey with us. Like the fact that that's the question that precedes us going, we need a bunch of money to spend on fundraising, shows that we haven't really laid the groundwork here. Like we haven't taken people on the journey of what the pipeline looks like. What is a pipeline? Why do we have a pipeline? I think we've either assumed that knowledge or whatever, and then we've got frustrated by the question of like, does anyone know Bill Gates? And I know that's probably kind of the most sort of apocryphal example, but I think we've all known those things. But I think there's another interesting thing about the language of this, though, and the sort of some of the debate that goes on in boards. So if you're fortunate to work for quite a wealthy charity, so I don't know, like a big name brand or an endowed charity or something like that, often there's whole committees talking about investment, yeah, but they're not generally talking about fundraising investment. They're talking about the treasury policy of the organisation, and generally, like charities are making some pretty conservative and safe bets, and you can understand that because effectively the trustees are looking after money that's there for the mission, not to blow it on the stock market or whatever. But there are whole board items on the investment policy and should we get these different investment advisors in, and hours of meetings can go on this kind of stuff, and very interesting. We hear from different investment advisors, we hear different kind of cautious approaches, how much goes into bonds, how much goes into the stock market. Do we sell fundraising like that? Do we find that the debate about fundraising is like that, or is the debate more about, looked at the management accounts for the last quarter and it looks like your major donor fundraising is 20% behind budget. Can you tell me why this is? Do you find those same committees calling in the investment advisors when the investments are down and saying, why is this? We have a very different approach, but we're using the same word.
Yeah, but it's on like one event didn't perform at the level that it was expected to, or what, and often it's still successful.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
How much, like in our like self-critical mode that we've been in for the last few minutes, and how much of this is on us to stop promising the world? Because I think sometimes as fundraisers, like we're naturally like, if you give us a bit of money, I could do this and this and this, and it's going to radically change fundraising trajectory, and I'm going to raise you £1 billion more. I mean, I'm being facetious, but like, I think we have like a tendency to maybe overpromise.
I think it cuts both ways, interestingly, and I think what you need is the middle ground. So you're absolutely right that sometimes you hear these proposals because I think someone feels they're really passionate about this piece of work, and either they've kind of slightly over-egged it, or they felt like they just need to go further to get it over the line, or there's competing bids or whatever. So I definitely think that's a part of it. And hey, as fundraisers, we're good at telling a story, yeah? But I do think that the truth is important in this, because all you're doing is setting yourself up or your successor up for some challenges ahead. But at the same time, I think where I more often see this coming apart, particularly in like the mass fundraising space, where we're talking about some pretty complex analysis and modelling once you're kind of trying to work out what a 10-year return on an investment in RG acquisition is or whatever, I think there's a danger we go the other way. And it's definitely something I came to learn that I've had when worked with some incredible like heads of individual giving who know their business and know their subject and know their numbers so well. And I think with that kind of learning and knowledge comes a real focus and dedication on trying to help other people understand that as well. And sometimes that's where things can come off the rails a bit. you can kind of think of the times where the board papers got reissued a couple of times in the lead up to the board. And you look at it and you go, but this has changed by £20 on a £1 million investment at 10 years' time. And I remember once having a conversation with someone saying, look, trust me, myself, the chief exec, the chair of the board, are not in 10 years' time going to be scrutinising this number and saying you were £20 out. You're trying to be utterly precise about something that is at best a model and actually accurate to the nearest 10,000. That's good enough in this space, because actually we could rerun the numbers a different way and we would get a different result. But what you're losing sight of is actually telling the story, because what you're doing is telling the numbers, and what you need to do is tell the story, and you need to head off the view that this will generate tons of complaints, or you need to talk about actually the lifetime of giving this opens up for the people that come into your charity through this route. You need to talk about the number that will go on then to leave us legacies and the impact that will have for our cause in years to come. And the fact that people will look back on this board meeting and the people around this table and realise that actually the decision they made to invest £1 million today is the thing that's driving huge increases in our impact in 5, 7, 10 years' time. You wouldn't engage a donor like that, and you need to see these people as very informed donors and take them on that story.
But also your board are potential donors, right? Like, I think sometimes we lose sight of that as well. Christine, were you going to ask a question?
I was going to ask a question, because then it made me think this whole conversation about, like, when you get too much into the detail. So detail is important, right? We're not saying detail isn't important, but there's a level of detail that where it gets too much, it's like you're losing the purpose of what you're asking. So I wanted to just kind of touch on when too much detail, like what's that tipping point when too much detail kind of takes you away from the story. You kind of lose people because your business case is 20 pages long and has every appendix.
And how can I add to that as well? Because I think sometimes, like, and I'm only saying this because I know I'm guilty of it, you assume so little of your board's knowledge. I think that's why you go into so much detail, because you feel the need to over-explain absolutely everything. So, like, yeah, I guess, like, to Christine's point, like, how do you not do that? How do you find a happy medium?
I think it's a real art, and for some people that is just incredibly hard to do, particularly I think if their role, as the example I was giving before, relies on being right about the detail and having the right models and the right numbers, it becomes really difficult. And I think what I would say is that if you know that you're someone, and I'm definitely someone who can knock out a huge long board paper and then go, how on earth can I get this to 4 pages? And you've got to force yourself to do that. And I think some of it is about stepping back and thinking about the story you're trying to tell. And there may be lots of chapters of that story that are really interesting from a techie perspective or whatever. But actually, to answer Christine's question, you can tell when you're losing people. You see their eyes glazing over, and you want to try and avoid yourself being in that position, because once you start losing people, it's really hard to get them back. And people kind of react to that sense of like, gosh, this is a pretty dry old topic, by actually then starting to doubt what you're saying. And I think this is the unfairest thing about some of these things, like the fundraiser who talks in huge amounts of detail about the technicalities of the model and the upgrades will deliver this and so on. The worst bit about it is that quite often a natural human reaction to that is to go, well, they're obviously hiding something behind these numbers. There's something questionable about this. I don't feel confident. They've changed the board papers 3 times. There's obviously something that they're trying to keep from us. And almost the opposite is true, in that person is so committed to the accuracy and the precision of their data that they don't want to be felt to be misleading somebody. But actually what's sometimes achieved is almost the opposite effect, and someone can kind of lose the credibility with that. And I think what I would say is that probably one of the key things is, if you know that's perhaps a bit of a danger or a kind of rocks off the shore that you might head towards, there's something about just getting someone you really trust and feel confident with, maybe a mentor, maybe a coach, and just playing that business case through and asking them to be that critical friend and to go, hang on a second, like, you've totally lost me now. Like, just cut back. What is it you're trying to say here? And cutting back to, like, what's the story in the simplest terms? And that's not saying boards are stupid, but boards are certainly busy and they've got lots of things on their agenda. And it's not that they want to say no to you necessarily, but you need to make it easy for them to say yes to you.
It's such a thing, though. Like, that's so important, is to know your audience, like who you're talking to.
And I think there's something about, like, actually the pre-work on this. Like, you wouldn't pitch up to a corporate pitch thinking that the business was done in the room. We all know that, like most pitches, most trust applications or whatever, often the decision's effectively been made before you turn up or your proposal turns up, because you've networked with the trustees, you spent time with the corporate partnership manager in the business, etc., etc. You kind of know where the land lies, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Quite often I think we see fundraising investment within our own organisation, whether it's on the board or the exec team or even just one-to-one with your fundraising director. I think we sometimes see that as being a different thing, and it's not really. Like, if you've only got 5 or 6 minutes to present a case to the board, and you don't know where every single member of the board sits on this kind of investment, what their concerns are, who's the person who doesn't like investing into face-to-face fundraising, how have you handled that? If you don't, you're a kind of a hostage to fortune, because you're going to end up playing those things out in front of the whole board. And that's where people start to kind of get a bit uncertain. I remember I was working with an organisation and I had a couple of fundraising consultants on my committee, and one of them had a particular view about investment, which was we could invest in one thing, but we couldn't invest in another. In this case, legacy and individual giving acquisition. And I was kind of like, but we can't really do one without doing the other. And this was kind of quite, and I kind of realised that I needed to, like, actually just work through this with the individuals on the committee so that we got to a place of shared understanding. I suppose the case we were trying to make was, if you invest in acquisition, you invest in retention, you invest in legacies, and you invest in brand, and you do those things in the right sequence, you will create a system which after 4 or 5 years is self-funding. And I think sometimes we don't articulate our investment cases as systems, because I think we go, that's far too complicated and confusing and so on. But actually, you can explain a system really simply. And the good thing is, if you know you've got like a demand coming up in 3 or 4 years' time, I don't know, there's a pay rise scheduled or whatever, you can even build an income engine whereby you invest in acquisition, retention, brand and legacy alongside it. And actually, you can predict what will be the income that you're generating from that. So actually, in 3 or 4 years' time, you can cover that pay rise. So you can use this as an instrument. And if you worked in like commercial finance and so on, that's how startup organizations and finance organizations operate. If we looked at the question a different way around and said, how much would we need to invest to get to this place? And what's the systems model that enables us to do that? All of a sudden, your fundraising goes from being this thing that just generates money to being this fund the rebrand in 3 years' time. So what I'm saying, I guess, is that as fundraisers, we inherently bring solutions. Sometimes I think investment cases land as problems or things that we need to find money for, but actually can reframe an investment case to say, what could this investment now enable us to do transformationally in 5 or 10 years' time? And I think this comes back to that point of how do we borrow some of that mindset of, say, an investment advisor advising the board on their treasury? Well, I think we can do that in fundraising. We can say, look, we can offer you some short-term returns. We can offer you a mid-term return. We can offer you a much longer-term return. And these are the kind of return levels you would expect on this. And actually, we're in a better place to say past performance is an indicator of the future. Some of our fundraising models are pretty accurate and pretty predictable as long as they're well executed and have the right backing of the organization. So my question would be, and there's a quote from a guy, I think his name's John Stewart, and he was chair of Legal and General, but also of Guide Dogs to the Blind. And he said, I realised that fundraisers are 12 times more effective than my best fund managers. And actually, we know that the returns on the stock market are generally significantly outstripped by well-executed fundraising. Yet we come into our investment cases a bit cap in hand, don't we, sometimes? And like, could you possibly manage to find this? And we will promise the earth in order to get it. But actually, we are going in there not asking for money just for the sake of money. We're asking for money that will transform lives in the years to come. And we should be unashamed about that as fundraisers. We should know that actually the investment advisor who's been in before us at the board will be having a debate about kind of a 4% return or a 5% return. If we look at legacy fundraising and compounded return, we are offering much more than that. So if we want to plan the difference we want to be making, because actually, whereas the charities, we are dealing with long, intractable problems that take time to solve. Well, actually, if we make this investment now, we know that in 10 years' time, we can be having this much greater impact. So if our vision is eradicating this problem, doing away with the need for ourselves, this investment now is a step on that road.
What strikes me most about everything you've just said, which is incredible and basically a masterclass in like how to think differently and to not be so compartmentalized or held back by traditional fundraising streams, but actually really thinking about fundraising as that enabler and therefore helps achieve the organizational strategy is critical to mission accomplishment, actually, and serving the people that an organization exists to support. It also strikes me that really what we also need to do as fundraisers is lean into the fact that we, as fundraisers, it is a profession. We know what we're talking about. We know how to do it. We need to be fundraising within our organization as hard as we fundraise outside of our organization. And that there's something about, fundraisers aren't always taken seriously as a profession, but actually there's a real skill set that exists within our sector, within the fundraising sector, that is able to marry empathy and storytelling and compassion with real commercial acumen in a way that doesn't have to exist in other parts of organizations.
I agree with you. I think it's interesting the number of times you use the word profession and professionals in what you just said. And we shouldn't be, we're in 2026 now. We shouldn't be still having to face, but we do, this sense of kind of like slightly hapless amateurs who've kind of found our way into this thing. And it's a bit like sales, and it's a bit like this, and it's a bit like that, but it's not really like anything. Like, fundraisers transform lives, full stop. If we, the sense that kind of actually fundraising, there's lots of that kind of mythology. Well, fundraisers shouldn't be paid. Well, why shouldn't fundraisers be paid? Of course, the stuff we need to do to strengthen kind of some of the standards and where we come across bad practice, we need to tackle that, of course. But at the same time, we need to recognize that fundraising done well is the difference between an organization succeeding or failing. It's the difference between someone benefiting from a service or not. It's the difference between an organization surviving or not. And actually, the work that we do as fundraisers spans a lot, doesn't it? It is that commerciality. It is that willingness to ask at the right time for the right thing. It is that ability to effectively connect donor and beneficiary and get out of the way at the right time, because that's where the magic really happens. And I think there's stuff we can do as fundraisers to develop our skills, to develop our teams. And I think sometimes one of the challenges is getting investment into fundraising, or indeed getting investment into building pro-fundraising culture in organizations, because actually in an organisation you're working with or whatever, imagine the power if you knew that every single person in that organisation, regardless of whether they were the receptionist on the help desk, they were the finance clerk, or they were the head of fundraising, if they were in a bar that evening and someone came up to them and said, "What is it you do for a job?" And they said, "This is what I do. This is the cause I work for. This is why it's important. And this is how you can help." They managed to say that before the barman had served up their margarita.
Yay, margaritas.
I had a real experience of this happening, and it was my comms director at the time, and we'd just done a program where we'd worked around the whole organisation, and part of that was that everybody had the opportunity to prepare and test out their elevator pitch. She came away with £5,000 from a conversation at a bar that very evening.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
So
That's so good.
This stuff, but it's not just that a situation like that might happen. And this was someone, in fairness, who was incredibly talented at telling stories and by nature of what she did anyway, and was hugely passionate about the organisation. But it's the fact that as a fundraiser, that every single person behind you in that organisation is able to articulate that story, is ready to spot a lead, is ready to hold a conversation with the donor if that's what happens. Or that everybody in the organisation could actually say, what is it that motivates a donor to this organisation?
Like, it's just curious enough to like ask the question.
I know one organisation I worked with did a thing that I think it was probably for November, because I think Legacy Awareness Month, and they basically did a thing, and I think this was in the days when people might have still had pay slips that sort of turned up. The days. But essentially, with the payslip came a note from a donor who was a legacy pledger, and this note said, "Hey, I'm Doris, shall we say, and I wanted to let you know that I put the charity in my will with a quarter of my house. The reason I've done this is because of this, this, and this. So I want you to know I'm picking up the salary bill this month in effect." And all of a sudden, I just said to people, "Oh my goodness, actually this person's legacy, which fortunately they were still alive and just a pledger, but actually that would cover the whole salaries of the organisation for a month and some." And all of a sudden that person had personality, and same organisation did like pull-ups of like volunteers and donors through the organisation that would just appear in different places. And kind of it's those nudges and prompts that actually help people to understand that the work that we're engaged in as fundraisers and the true difference it makes. But yeah, I don't think we should hide our light under a bushel either. And I think it's really important that when we're making the case for investment, we understand what makes that group tick. We understand kind of what the story of that investment is. Like, what's the narrative? Like, what's the difference this is going to make? And of course, what are the numbers? But actually, if you can land the difference and you can land the narrative and you can explain like actually how this helps mission, then actually the numbers themselves just become the checkpoint. But I think all too often business cases get absolutely focused onto the number when actually it's the impact that really counts.
So I think my question is, where do you start? So we've talked a lot about the what, but like, how do you even get going? So like, you need some investment, you want to do more. Like, where do you even begin? How do you get going with building an investment case for fundraising?
I think it's all got to start from a really solid understanding of where you are. And that probably sounds like, oh my goodness, this is grandmother and egg stuff. But the number of times that I think people jump in with something without understanding the whole system. And I'm doing a bit of work at the moment with Damien Chapman, who I know you know, Christine.
We love Damien.
We love Damien.
Well, Damien and I are now doing IFC this year, and we've been doing a bit of work around kind of systems, which is I would immediately say is Damien's specialist area. But I think the value of understanding your fundraising system and where the microsystems that make it up are falling down, and really interrogating that is absolutely fundamental to the success of your fundraising. And it may actually be that you conclude that what you thought you needed isn't what you actually need right now.
It's so interesting that you say that, because actually at IFC last year, Damien and I did a masterclass on these.
Where's my IFC session with me? He just got like real FOMO now.
We're open to bookings next year.
So sorry. But it was on. We worked on tools around diagnosing the problems in your system, or like understanding like the base of where you were, and it was so useful. It was useful, I hope, for the people who came, but I actually found it really useful teaching it, because it just, all the things that you think you know or you kind of are doing, but actually like the tool, like the documentation, the tools, this is like, and just to have that, like, anyway.
No, but let me build that out a bit more, because I think along with the search for Bill Gates and the Holy Grail, one of the other perils of modern fundraising is the search for the silver bullet. And this is often driven by boards or CEOs going, come on, we must be able to raise more money. There's got to be a magic answer to this. And so the fundraisers go off and come up with elaborate proposals or suggestions that if we acquire loads more donors, but actually what the focus has come off of is the basics done really well. It's that kind of boring excellence stuff that actually is what underpins successful fundraising. There's more money raised from closing gaps in retention and tidying up journeys and fixing those pain points for donors that you never even know about because the donors just go quiet because no one's followed them up. There's much more money in that than there is going and acquiring new donors of whom you'll lose a huge chunk in your first couple of years. But almost the organizations sometimes drive this need for investment. So a new fundraising director comes in and the organization says, look, you can spend some money on this, but we've got to increase the fundraising. It's stagnating. It's not moving forward. And sometimes the focus can be put into totally the wrong place. Like, let's grow the corporate partnerships team, or let's grow this, or let's grow that. When actually the capability of the team that's already there is being undermined by the system not working for them, by those things that they gripe about every day. No one really listens. They go, that's just the way it is. And actually, usually the problem when you get to the why is not quite what it appears to be on the surface. But actually, if you fix those things, everything works better and you raise more money and people are happier and they stay longer.
I love the why. It's like my favorite tool.
I can't tell you how many interviews I've said this in. Like, you know, when you're interviewing, they're like, where would you put in like investment? Or like, what's the next thing you do? And I'm like, no, like, let's stop trying to like have some shaky foundations and we're just putting stuff on the top and expecting it all to stack up like some sort of like uneven Jenga situation. Like, actually get your foundation sorted and then we'll stack on top. It's really interesting. I remember interviewing for a charity. Gosh, I want to say it was like 8 years ago now, big brand name charity. And we had a really interesting conversation. Like, and because the presentation was like, what new challenge events would you invest in? Like, look at our portfolio and what new challenge events would you invest in? And like, my presentation was like, I wouldn't. I was like, you have a really good, strong, wide portfolio. I was like, your problem isn't your portfolio. The problem is that you're not filling your portfolio places. And then you're offering these discounts right at the end, these like free opportunities to enter, or like no, like reduced fundraising, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, flip it. Do early discount, get people in early, have them fundraise from the beginning. They're likely to raise more, get them to activate their pages. And then like, we'll go from there. But yeah, I think like, it's so interesting with charity that you said charities are always looking for that silver bullet. Like, what's the next thing we can do to fix our fundraising? But actually, like, it's probably already there. It's just tweaking what we're doing well.
Well, it's that classic question that I haven't heard for a little while now because I think people have forgotten about it. But what's the next ice bucket challenge?
Oh my gosh, the no makeup selfie.
But actually, if you turn that around, you remember like the whole Facebook challenge thing. That kind of, I mean, it was my biggest ever mistake in fundraising. I remember like well before COVID, meeting someone who was like really a leading light behind these Facebook challenges, and he taught me all through it. And I said, look, I don't think this is for us. Like, this is churny. Like, you're going to get these people in, because at the time data capture just wasn't part of the conversation. It was like, you get them in, You take them on a journey over a month in a community. They raise some money. They send you the money through Facebook. You thank them and off they go. And what's more, keep your brand out of it. Nothing branded. Just use ad sets. Like use stock imagery. Much better than your brand. I'm like, this isn't us. Like this is churny. It's not relational. I had to get the guy back like a few months later and say, hey, you know that thing you were talking to us about? We're kind of a bit out of ideas because everything we do is face to face, and there's this kind of COVID thing coming along. But it's interesting because even with that digital investment piece, I think there's a really interesting bit about how you do it, because with something that's kind of fairly rapid turnover like that, now I know you're not seeing 7-to-1 ROIs anymore or anything like that, but you can still know if a product's going to succeed or not pretty quickly, like probably 6 days of like live marketing and you'll know. If it's not working, you pull the investment. You haven't spent too much. It's not optimizing. You can take it to people you've already got through a journey. So be it. If it is working, and I remember once having a conversation, and this again, I think is the piece about kind of how you've got to create a bit more of an entrepreneurial spirit. I remember talking, and they were telling me, well, we piloted this thing, and I can't remember if it was a lead gen or something like that. And they said, and it was going really well, and then like we stopped it. And I'm like, well, why did you stop if it was going really well? So we ran out of budget, and I'm like, so why didn't you just keep spending? Like we have an £8 million investment in fundraising budget here. Like you only had to say, this is going really well. I spent the 20,000 I had. Can I spend some more? So I said, you don't know if the next thing's going to work really well. So if something's going and it's working, keep it going until it's not working anymore, and then turn it off quickly and capture the learning and move on to the next thing. But if you apply that in a digital model where you've got like a 60-day turnaround or something on like a digital challenge, you can launch your digital challenge. If it works, you ramp it up until actually you're not getting a positive return on investment, and then stop the investment. You get the money back in, you pay the organization back your budget, and then you invest the surplus in your next event. And you can run 10, 11 of those events in a year. If half of them work, and if you get at least a 3-to-1 ROI and you turn off the ones that don't work, you will, on an initial investment that might only be enough to run 1 or 2 events, have run a whole year's program just by essentially hothousing that investment. But we don't tend to think like that. We kind of go, well, I've got this budget for the whole year, so I need to spread it across the whole year, which means...
Yeah, and you like randomly drop it in different months to like spend, to make the phasing look better on your budget so the finance director is happy.
So you may not actually need investment. What you need is a conversation with the finance director to say, as long as I make the 100k net surplus, can I use any surplus beyond that to invest into further campaigns with these guardrails on it, these decision levels? So all of a sudden you've taken a £100,000 investment and made it run a whole set of campaigns all through the year with no additional risk to the organisation. But you've, rather than asking for £1 million for a digital transformation budget, you've basically made that money keep working for you by making those arrangements. And it's a little bit different to how budgets normally work, but you pulled it off and you didn't need to go and pitch for it.
It's almost like having a revolving credit.
Yeah.
Like it's quite like, it's like a revolving credit model almost that
and that will only work with a really fast turnaround product. But I guess what I'm trying to say is we've got to think where our boards are at, think what they need, think what the organization needs. And you can kind of effectively bundle up those things and say, like a bit like the guy from Legal and General and Guide Dogs for the Blind. If we thought a bit more like a fund manager, so we know that fundraising returns are better. So actually, let's use that to our advantage. I would love to find an organization, and I haven't yet found one that does this in a real pure sense, that says, look, we've got a choice. We either put our money in the stock market and get a 4 or 5% return with a bit of risk at sort of probably 10% each way, or we choose to invest internally into our fundraising. And that's a treasury decision as to where we put the money that we've got in the bank that we need for our mission in the future. If we can have clear bets that match off and give us a better return with perhaps a lower risk margin or at least the same risk margin, why would the organization not use investing in itself and its future mission rather than investing into Apple and goodness knows what sits in this bundle of stocks?
Elon Musk becoming a trillionaire.
Well, I think it's a different way of thinking, because if it were your own money and you had that choice, where would you be putting it? Like, people are really interested in investing now and so on. What could be more ethical than investing into your own delivery? But those conversations happen in different committees at different times on different bits of the board agenda. I'm yet to find an organisation, and if there's someone on listening to this podcast who this is what their organisation's doing, do reach out, because I think there's some fascinating case studies that we need to build up around this.
So I guess just a question that we ask everybody at the end of every episode: if you could leave our listeners or watchers with one thing to take away from today, what would it be?
Believe in the difference that you make. And convey that difference at every opportunity. See the case for investment as being a fundraising challenge. Think about the narrative, the story, the donors, how you want people to feel, and actually help them to feel the difference that decision is going to make, and keep it short and sweet.
Amazing. I love it. Thank you so much. You've been a fantastic guest. I feel like I've learned a huge amount today, and I'm kicking myself for every investment paper I put forward that definitely did not follow any of this advice, but I will do better in the future. And so thank you so much for joining us today. Please do like, share and subscribe. It really helps us reach even more amazing fundraisers in the sector. You can find us on Instagram at @RaiseCharityPod and on our website, which is thisisraise.co.uk. But for now, cheers to raising money, voices and glasses. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.